I acknowledge that TMAG is on the country of the Muwinina people who did not survive British colonisation, and I pay my respects to the Tasmanian Aboriginal community. I honour Aboriginal elders past and present and value the history, culture and strength of the Tasmanian Aboriginal people. Hello Hobart. My name's Mark Horseman. I'm absolutely thrilled to be here at yet another Beaker Street at TMAG. I've been here from the start. That was like 3 or 4 years ago. I mean, so long ago now. I'm wearing glasses. Wearing glasses to read my notes. It's great to see you all here tonight, and in a somewhat changed gallery, central gallery that we've had in the past. There was that interesting Escher-esque kind of structure in the middle there, which always made these gatherings pretty interesting to work with. But here we are, and tonight we're about to hear something very profound, raw and honest about eco-grief. So, emperor penguins not surviving until by the end of the century, the Gulf Stream collapsing. Every day there's a new stat or a factoid or a finding that reveals something fundamental about rapid change on our planet. Now, you might turn the page, you might just keep scrolling, you might just tune out. But how about the scientists that bring us this information and are constantly experiencing these alarming changes day in and day out? How do they deal when really they're deeply immersed, they're bearing witness to environmental decline? Tonight we have 4 powerhouse women working in science and arts here in Tasmania, and they're here to talk about how they, as well as many others around the world, deal with eco-grief. Now sadly, I'm not sure how long eco-grief has actually been in the vocabulary, but it's a thing, right? Eco-grief. So let's meet them now. Dr Jennifer Lavers is a lecturer in marine science at the Institute for Marine and Antarctic Studies at UTAS. Her research focuses on understanding how remote islands and seabirds can act as bioindicators of ocean health, particularly in relation to plastic pollution. She coordinates the Adrift Lab, which I'm guessing we're going to hear a bit more about tonight. They're a team of scientists who mentor graduate students, and she's actively involved in science communication. And I dare say, if you've heard about the impact of plastic on seabirds, it's probably due to her. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr Jennifer Lavers. And if each of you could give us a little wave so we could tell who's who from who, that'd be great. Oh, look, I'd also like to say that I'm thrilled to be speaking in Auslan for the first time tonight, so thank you very much, Priscilla and Rob. Megan Grant is a PhD candidate with the Adrift Lab, aforementioned Adrift Lab, at IMAS, the Institute for Marine and Antarctic Studies. Her research is on the role of seabirds as vectors, I guess as transporters, for nutrients and pollutants, and in particular, what happens to the Lord Howe Island ecosystem when flesh-footed shearwaters eat plastic. Ladies and gentlemen, Megan Grant. Lillian Stewart is also a PhD candidate from the Adrift Lab at IMAS. She's researching the enormous amounts of plastic building up on Cocos Keeling and Christmas Islands. And not only how to remove that plastic pollution, but how to use it. She's also spent considerable time rummaging around in the vomit pellets from Tasmanian gulls to find out the unnatural things that they end up eating. Ladies and gentlemen, Lillian Stewart. Lucienne Rickard is an artist who was awarded a PhD from UTAS. She's been exhibiting nationally for the past 20 years and worked almost exclusively in drawing for the last 15. Lucienne's most recent work explores her concern for wildlife. You'll probably know, in fact you walked past some of it, her long-term performance, extinction studies, here at TMAG. So over the course of a year or so, she drew a series of recently extinct animals or plants. She then erased them and then drew another one over it, and repeat. Ladies and gentlemen, Lucienne Rickard. over to you.
Thank you very much, Mark. That was just lovely. We would just like to add our own acknowledgement of country. We respect the knowledge, tradition and practices of Indigenous peoples and consider it a privilege to learn and walk with you.
In 2017, the term eco-anxiety was formally defined as the chronic fear of environmental doom. More than 60% of Australians believe the federal government is doing a bad job of dealing with the serious threats posed by climate change. In America, the number of people worrying about these issues has increased by 44% in a decade. While it may seem, then, that already lots of people are feeling it, the truth is, eco-anxiety, or eco-grief as it's often known, has been documented for decades. We simply didn't talk about it. In 1949, Aldo Leopold published the Sand County Almanac. Here is perhaps the most famous quote from his book. One of the penalties of an ecological education is that one lives alone in a world of wounds. Much of the damage inflicted on land is quite invisible to the layman. An ecologist must either harden his shell and make believe that the consequences of science are none of his business, or he must be the doctor who sees the marks of death in a community that believes itself well and does not want to be told otherwise. Throughout his book, Leopold focuses on the interconnectedness of soil, water, plants, animals, and us, humans. And he warns that we will feel a sense of breakdown in community when we lose our connection to nature. So, more than 70 years ago, the source and impact of eco-grief was already apparent. In some ways, this eco-grief has become the post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD, of our times, except with one key difference. How does one begin to heal when the trauma has no end in sight? Scientists, activists, and community members engaged in make or break environmental issues, they cannot escape this trauma. On the television, radio, and social media, forests are scorched, oceans are ablaze, wildlife are homeless and filled with plastic. It is everything you see, read, and talk about with friends. These stories, they play in loop, cutting small holes in your heart. Once, we were resilient. Now, we're exhausted, broken. So, what does this hold for the next generation?
When I reflect on the journey that brought me here, I'm often reminded of a few things that made me who I am today. I was a bit of a strange kid. I was, and shamelessly still am, obsessed by chickens. I love getting my hands dirty and, of course, prodding all the dead things that I'd found on the beach. I still do that, shamelessly. But mostly I just love to be present in the natural spaces around me. In fact, the first word to come from my mouth was bird. And for my 7th birthday, I was gifted a field guide by my parents, so I could put names to all the feathered creatures that I saw. I can't quite articulate what it was that drove me to be so utterly indulged in the natural world. I just knew that I really had to be amongst it, and that what we loved was worth protecting. Growing older, I began to learn that the natural world is an intimately connected system, with every life form and element having a specific role to play in absolute perfect balance. What also became apparent to me was the need to not upset that balance, but by 9 years old, I was starting to learn new concepts like extinction, deforestation, climate change, and pollution. The world we lived in was not as balanced as I'd previously known, and it baffled me that something as life-giving as lush as our 1,000-year-old rainforests could be reduced to nothing more than a smouldering pile in less than a day. Why anyone would want to do this was just beyond me. As a child, I felt a kind of pain and discomfort, and the only thing that child was able to compare that to was the loss of someone close or saying goodbye. At the time, I didn't understand it, but from then on, I decided that whatever I did with my life, it would be to protect what we have to lose. I wanted a job where I travelled and I spent time with anything that grew feathers, and I wanted to live a life that just filled my heart with as much joy as my childhood experiences had. Still, with nothing but a gut feeling and absolutely no clue what I wanted to be, I went on to university. For my final year, I secured an honours project where I was tasked with recording plastic in the diet of Tasmanian seagulls. I spent months collecting and pulling apart their regurgitated vomit pellets to document what these birds were eating. What I found in these pellets, which you can see up here on the screen, was a rainbow of all things natural and synthetic. It was found that more than 90% of the pellets that I collected contained items that should not be there, particularly items that were single use, that we use and throw away every single day. Having either used some of these items myself or seeing those around me use them, I could not help but feel personally responsible that I was contributing to the very thing I'm trying so hard to prevent. During my study, I grew increasingly fond of the gulls, and I realised that they are in many ways the perfect bird. They're cunning, they're efficient scavengers, and equally they're crafty foragers. They're almost perfectly adapted to changing environments, yet somehow these birds have become synonymous with filth and nuisance. The reality here is that they have evolved to exploit the world that we have provided to them. By expanding our cities and reducing coastal and wetland habitats and providing a buffet of freely available scraps, also known as landfill, these birds have triumphed time and time again and become quite content sharing our modern environments. These birds are not filthy, they're not nuisances, they're genius. However, the overpowering message from experts and scientists around the world is that this is not something that can be sustained. Global gull populations are declining and pollution continues to increase. With items such as plastic bags, knife blades and styrofoam now documented in our birds and our Tasmanian birds, the outlook is not a positive one. When even the most adaptable and resilient species are struggling, how do we expect those already on the brink to push through? I made a promise to myself as a child. I was going to make a difference in the world. I didn't know how, but I just knew why. Because the thing that gives us life was hurting, and I too was hurting. I couldn't bear the thought of knowing that I just didn't do enough. I now find myself continuing down the road of research, this time as a PhD student. I'd hoped that by now I kind of knew what I wanted to be when I grew up. I don't. I just kept moving with that gut feeling. When I found out that my PhD project would take me to tropical and remote islands, I genuinely thought I'd won the jackpot. How could you not? It's tropical remote island, and we're in Tassie. It felt like it was the answer to that feeling that had pushed me for 24 years, and finally this was my chance to make that positive change in the world that I had just wanted for so long. In fact, right now, I'm actually packing my bags in preparation for my first field season, something which is a real coming-of-age experience for a young, wide-eyed scientist. And of course, perfect timing being in a Tasmanian winter. But something still just doesn't quite feel right, and I really should just be excited. But I'm not. The reality is this. Right now, my job is to work out how to fix this. And quite frankly, it's a shitstorm. This is actually one of the beaches that I will be visiting. I had no role in making this, yet me and my generation are the ones that are expected to come up with the solution. We're expected to right the wrongs of those before us who had every given opportunity to do something, but instead they did nothing. In my short lifetime, I've gone from watching Sir David Attenborough present beautiful, enchanting documentaries to him now practically pleading with his viewers, governments, and organisations around the world to do better and to protect what we still have while we still can. In his words, we have moved from being part of nature to being apart from nature. In this documentary, this quote features he says with pain in his eyes that this has been his witness statement. If even David Attenborough, the most renowned naturalist of our time, is at a loss for words, then who am I supposed to look to for reassurance that what I do day in and day out is going to be impactful and worth it? To be perfectly honest with you, I am angry and I am completely heartbroken. My job as a marine scientist is to work on the front line of, quite frankly, an environmental catastrophe, undoing decades of damage, greed, and disregard. How am I supposed to keep it together when the entity that gives us the very air we breathe is being treated as nothing more than a bottomless sink for the problems we refuse to face? How am I supposed to be okay with the fact that me and this fabulous team here are given the same level of credibility as any random on the internet? How do I keep my spirits high when our leaders treat decades of research as nothing more than someone's opinion? How on earth did we get here? In a way, I got that dream job that little girl wanted. I just never thought it would be like this.
Eco-grief comes in many forms and affects people in many different ways, similar to what depression and other mental illnesses can do to people. I certainly resonate with a lot of what Lillian said. I've wanted to work with wildlife for so long, and now that I'm at that point, I've realised that it's not just cute, fluffy animals. And getting out there in nature, it's working with the ugly side of it, and it can be really hard sometimes. But the biggest impact that I've encountered from eco-grief has been heartbreaking in more ways than I can count. Eco-grief has taken this from me, or stolen this from me, and I don't think I will ever get it back. When I was a child, I had an amazing upbringing. I lived in a sleepy seaside town on the central north coast. I had a large backyard with trees to climb, chickens to feed. I had a dog and a cat. I had a sandpit and a tree house, a swing set and a trampoline. My brother and I rode bikes around the streets and would venture into the bushland at the end of the road we lived in. We would create little bushwalks and pretend to be rangers or mountain bikers or adventurers. Of course, all of this was possible because of my parents. They were and still are incredible. They take me to soccer practice, circus school, cello lessons, music camp. We'd go on bushwalks, nights away, even a few overseas trips. I went to good schools. My parents cared about my education. They'd help me with my homework. Mum's an amazing cook. We'd always have homemade biscuits, slices and cakes in the house. Mum taught me all that I know about cooking, as well as sewing and other homemaking activities. My dad is great around the house. He made my brother and I a tree house. He taught me basic woodworking skills. He taught me how to sail. But most of all, my parents are kind, caring and loving. So as a child, my opinions on parenthood were 100% influenced by my own parents. I wanted what they had. I wanted to be the perfect mother to my very own child. I wanted to teach and nurture a child in the same way they nurtured me. I remember thinking of the sort of parent that I would be, how I would be loving and caring and open. I thought about how many children I wanted, one at a minimum, but so that the first wouldn't get too lonely, I'd have another, maybe 2 years apart, so that they could be friends and develop social skills outside of school and play with each other, just like my brother and I had when we were children. I wanted 2 girls, but really, I would have been happy with whatever. I remember in high school, around grade 9, when I wrote a list of names that I would like to call my children: Joanna or Cassia, Finn or Bo. When I got older, grade 11 and 12, and then into university, where I studied a degree in environmental science, continued on into my honours, where I studied plastics in seabird nests, and then into a PhD, where I now study the impacts of plastic ingestion on seabirds, I began to learn more about the world and what was happening to it. Climate change, biodiversity loss, pollution, famine, overpopulation, the list goes on. That dream of being a parent slowly slipped out of my grasp. Slow at first, like I was trying to suppress it. Like I didn't want to listen to the rational part of my brain. But deep down, I knew that being a parent was no longer becoming a realistic or sensible idea. With all that I knew about the world, how could I responsibly bring a child into it? How could I subject an innocent child to what we are already facing now, but on a scale much worse than what we currently know? How could I knowingly bring a child into a dying planet? It would be irresponsible of me to do that. I would be an irresponsible parent. One that didn't care enough for their child and their future. One that was selfish, putting my want for a child above their needs as a human. I often wonder what would have happened if I had become a lawyer or an accountant or gone into any other profession other than environmental science. Would I still have had that same conscience? Maybe I would have been naive and ignorant about the world's increasing problems and blindly had children, only learning about the oncoming destruction much later, too late. Even now, if I were to drop what I was doing straight away and go back to square one and start learning something completely different and take on an entirely different career, something far removed from environmental science, I still wouldn't be able to go back to before, to that blind ignorance. I can't turn away from what I already know. I can't turn my back on the planet. So, I'm not having children. I won't get to be a mother. I can't live out my childhood dreams and have the 2 children and perfect life that I always imagined. Deep down, there is a part of me that still wants that life, but I can't bring myself to honour that. I can't do that to them. It's not that I don't want children. I do. There are times when it hits me so hard, it stops me in my tracks. Last weekend, I had just finished cleaning the house and was getting dinner ready and thought to myself, this is what my mother did. I would probably make a good mother too. But then I stopped. That smile that had formed from that thought faded from my face, and a pang of sadness washed through me. This happens often. So it's not that I don't want children, it's that I have chosen not to have children. Am I envious of others who have children? No. But maybe I'm envious of their reckless abandon, to their blindness towards this issue, or to what they don't know, and what I sometimes wish I don't know. It's strange talking about this to such a large audience full of people I don't know. I only really told my parents about this 2 weeks ago, even though I've known this for many years now. I only told them because they're here in the audience right now. And I couldn't break the news about this very personal topic to them in such an impersonal way. Why didn't I tell them sooner, you may ask? I didn't want to disappoint them. I didn't want to break their hearts. So while eco-grief has affected me so much so that I have chosen not to have children, it's also affected my relationships and the people I love. It's slowly spreading like an untreatable disease. Some people may think that my ideas are too radical, or maybe that I'm being too cautious. Maybe I am, but maybe I'm not at all. Either way, if you want kids, go out and do that. I'm not here to stop you. My goal of today's talk was not to change your opinions, but simply to voice my own. You do you, and I'll do me, and this is what eco-grief has done to me. But the thing is, it's not just me. I'm not the only one impacted in this way. I am not the only victim of eco-grief. You have 4 powerhouse women up on this stage who are articulate and smart, and for all intents and purposes would make great parents. But we have all made the decision not to have children. And that has been a huge sacrifice, not only for us, but for the people around us as well. We have sacrificed the biological flow of life. We have broken the natural progression of being a human. We have ticked off education, finding a partner, getting a job. We will not be ticking off having a child. Instead, we will try and fulfill our lives in other ways. We will do what we can to try and fill that niche.
Securing an academic position in the university system is a long, hard road. In many ways, those who make it, the research scientists, the professors, are a bit like adult sea turtles. And I'm not just referring to them being old, tired relics. Yes, you can laugh at that. What I mean is this. A female turtle lays her eggs in a sandy nest on the beach. While many hundreds of hatchlings may emerge, only 1 in 1,000 will survive to adulthood and return to the beach to start the cycle again. The real world is tough, and a young turtle's life is a mixture of adventure and terror. No doubt, countless scientists would use those exact same words to describe their own journey through academia. Now, one of the aspects that keeps scientists motivated is the prospect of one day having your own lab. A room full of bright, young graduate students, full of energy and ideas, with whom you share a passion for marine conservation. That and fieldwork in spectacular destinations, such as the Cocos Keeling Islands here in Australia and Antarctica, and incredible species like seabirds and sharks. This really is the stuff that dreams are made of. As Megan and Lillian captured so beautifully in their words this evening, they were hopelessly drawn to this world. As their supervisor and mentor, it's been an incredible feeling to witness these students come to term with the fact that they are the lucky ones. They are the turtle hatchlings that made it back to the beach. Their dreams, right now, it's all happening. Flying in over Lord Howe Island, one of our main field sites, is one of those moments. It's day one. The students are electric with energy, practically bouncing off the walls of the tiny plane that's carried across to the island from Sydney. They're so desperate for their first glimpse of the island that the first few photos are mostly blue water and plane propellers. My colleague, Alex, and I roll our eyes endlessly and joke about having to babysit the children. But the reality is, it's a privilege. And we will replay these moments of innocence and joy over and over in our minds. Because life is about to change for these students, and it will never be the same. For 2 weeks straight, we will stand together in this exact research station, hunched over a sterile workbench. On it sits a dead seabird, maybe dozens of dead seabirds. By now, each of us knows their role. One person cuts the bird open and removes the ingested plastic, while another records data and takes tissue samples to send back to the lab. We're doing science, and folks are feeling chatty after their morning cup of tea. So at first, the conversation is lighthearted. Someone finds something recognizable in the stomach of one of the birds, a balloon clip, a bottle cap maybe, and the team pauses for a moment to express their shared fascination. But as morning turns to evening and the days wear on, the cracks start to show. At first, I usually notice that the conversation has changed. Fascination has shifted to frustration, the endless amounts of unavoidable plastic, the death of countless innocent creatures. Day after day, and for some of us, like me, year after year, folks start disappearing from the room, sometimes only for a few minutes, but when they don't come back, I go check on them. A few weeks ago, I found one of our long-term volunteers, Paul, leaning up against a wall, alone. And before I could say a single word, I felt the full weight of a big man in my small arms as he shook uncontrollably, his tears wetting my shoulder. In that moment, I can't remember what we said to each other. Seeing him so broken, my memory seems to want to blow all of this out. It's self-preservation, I guess. Over the past decade, I've watched each and every one of my students, volunteers, and colleagues go through this exact trauma. I joke that I try not to take it personally, that everyone who works with me ends up broken, crying, changed for the worse. But how can I not take this personal on some level? My dream was to have a lab of my own, to mentor and inspire the next generation of young scientists. But now, I'm terrified for them to be around me. My projects break people. They thought they were coming to an island oasis, fulfilling a life's dream. Now, they're a heap on the floor, and I cannot make their pain go away. It's never going to be the same for them, and I did this. My own pain blends with theirs, and I don't know where it stops and starts anymore. Now, in our lab, we talk endlessly and openly about mental health, and I go out of my way to host special mentoring and training workshops for my beautiful students, arming them with unique and critical skills like science communication, which you see on full display this evening. They're brilliant, beautiful, capable young scientists. But who am I kidding? Nothing I do will ever make up for the eco-trauma they've experienced. Try as I might, I cannot protect any of them, and I cannot make it go away. Quietly typing an email about the most mundane of tasks, this burden creeps in. Alone in my office, tears regularly roll down my face, and no one has known this pain until now. I want to tell you about this photo. A few weeks ago, the Lord Howe Island team decided to share with the world the realities of what we were witnessing through posting images like this one on social media that are raw and sometimes hard to look at. The truth is, 2021 has been one of the worst years on record for the birds. On this particular morning, only a few weeks ago on Lord Howe Island, the team found 41 dead seabirds washed up on the beach. This is a record, but one we're not proud of. When our backpacks and bike baskets were completely filled with dead seabirds, we had no choice but to stuff the remaining ones down our sleeves. In the darkness, I slowly laid these birds out, facing towards the ocean, their home. And as the sun rose, I asked our photographers to help me capture this very image. They hesitated. Why did something so awful need to be documented? Recently, I recalled this exact event for a soft-spoken journalist who asked, after the photo, "What did you do?" I dug a big hole in the sand and buried the birds, I said. Then I went home and I boiled the kettle.
Okay, so my name's Lucienne and I'm an artist. I'm the A in this STEM collective. You may be wondering what I'm doing on this panel, and with these three very impressive scientists, you might be thinking, what does she know about eco-grief and the problems our world is facing? I'll be straight up with you all, I have no scientific qualifications. I'm just an artist, but I do have a lot in common with these women up here with me tonight. My story of falling in love with nature as a child is almost identical to what Megan and Lillian have already described. But in one of those strange coincidences that life sometimes offers up, I also have Lord Howe Island in common too. My grandmother was a Lord Howe Islander, and our family has been there since about a generation after its settlement. I spent every summer holiday on the island as a kid. It was there, swimming and hiking and playing in the Kentia palm forests, that I was first captivated by the natural world. I fell asleep at night listening to a cacophony of shearwater calls. I spent twilights laying on the dunes at Ned's Beach, watching them flock home to their nests. I've loved those birds for what feels like my whole life. I still viewed the island and the shearwaters through the rose-coloured glasses of childhood, until quite recently. Learning about Jen's research and how much the birds are struggling was a rude wake-up call. But back to why I'm here. Back in mid-2019, I had what you could call a revelatory moment. My partner and I happened to spend an evening binging several documentaries about the environment that were particularly shocking. I wasn't completely unaware of species loss and habitat degradation. But like so many non-scientists out there, I didn't know just how bad things were. And I hadn't known just how much Australia was letting the whole world down. I found myself unable to get to sleep that night. I was furious with myself for never having done anything. I was suddenly terrified by the knowledge that we were trashing our environment and putting ourselves and every other living thing in great peril. I spent the night trying to suppress the swelling panic. So I lay in bed, unable to sleep, and kept asking myself, what can I do? And the only answer I could come up with was, I can draw. I knew that people valued beautiful drawings. I had a suspicion that many of us value things that humans make, like art, more than other life forms. I was so angry at our disregard for our wildlife that I wanted to shock people. I decided to spend a year of my life making large-scale, really detailed drawings of recently extinct species, and I was going to erase every single one of them the moment they were finished, and I was going to make people watch. This idea became a project at the Tasmanian Museum and Art Gallery that I called Extinction Studies. In performing extinction studies, I encouraged visitors to the museum to talk to me. In fact, I initiated as many conversations as I could. I researched every species as thoroughly as possible and tried to tell people how incredible they had been and precisely how we had shoved them out of existence. I had conversations with thousands of people of all ages, socioeconomic statuses, race, culture, gender, you name it. Many moments from extinction studies have stuck with me, but there was an interaction with one little boy that I replay in my mind all the time. He was part of a school group touring the museum. I would guess that they were grade 3 or 4, just babies really, chattering away and super excited to be on an excursion. Their teacher stopped at my workspace and asked me to explain what I was doing. I spoke about extinction, but I was used to adapting my spiel to the age of who I was talking to. I wasn't in the business of frightening little kids. So I told them that yes, it's a sad thing to erase my drawings. And yes, extinction is even sadder. But we should only get just sad enough so that we think to ourselves, okay, I'm going to take really good care of all the animals and plants and insects around me. The kids seemed pretty interested, not too down about the subject matter. They had a bunch of questions for me. After a few minutes, their teacher rounded them up and they started to head off into the museum. They'd all been extremely cute and engaged, and I was feeling good about how I'd communicated some difficult stuff to them. But there was one little boy who had had his hand up to ask a question the entire time. The teacher hadn't noticed this before moving off. So I bent down to his level and said, "You can ask me something quickly and then catch up with your class." I remember his eyes the most. He had big, beautiful blue eyes, and there were tears beginning to form in them. He looked at me and said, "Some people say the whole world's going extinct." He caught me completely off guard. I was so stunned that I didn't do the thing that adults are supposed to do in that situation. I didn't have a quick, reassuring response for him. In fact, I had no idea what to say at all. I can't even remember what my response was. But I always feel like I let that kid down. I hope he's okay. I hope he talked to his teacher or his parents and that they responded better than I did. I'm convinced that this little kid, 6 or 7 years old, was experiencing eco-grief. He'd obviously heard frightening things about the environment long before his class stopped at my workspace in TMAG. I'm sure his parents were trying to protect him from the worst of the information, just like I had. But he'd gotten a sense of it somehow anyway. His response was the most raw and clear example of eco-grief in children that I witnessed. But it actually became a pretty common occurrence for me to see kids struggling with these kinds of emotions. Most often it would go like this. I would strike up a conversation with a parent or a grandparent visiting the museum with their child or grandchild. Again, I would always be really careful not to frighten the kid, but we'd get to talking about environmental problems, mostly in pretty broad terms. The adult I was talking to would generally sigh, look extremely sad, and then look down at the child and say something like, "Oh, but this generation gives me so much hope. They've got a lot of work to do to fix all of our mistakes." I would always look at the kid when this was being said. They would glance up, smile, and shuffle around nervously a bit. On the surface, they seemed okay. But there was always a fleeting moment where you could almost see a great weight descending on them. They knew we were talking about very serious things, and they knew we were talking about them, but they just didn't fully understand yet. I remember similar moments when I was a kid. When I was 9, my mother was diagnosed with life-threatening cancer. My parents spoke to me about it in a sensitive, edited way, but it was still scary. My mother recovered. There was an end to that problem, but as Jen has mentioned, there may be no end to eco-grief. If I can ask just one thing of you all here tonight, it is this. Please don't say that to children. Please stop laying your hope at the feet of little kids. Stop saying that it's their job to fix our mistakes. It's not fair to them, and it's not helping us all now.
As we prepare to leave this stage, we want to have an honest conversation with you, the audience. Often, at the end of events such as this, we are presented with two frequent questions. What are the secrets to staying hopeful? And what quick and easy solutions can we provide to tackle the world's problems? In many ways, these are entirely reasonable questions. Most of us attend events like this to seek answers and to feel a sense of community, to feel more hopeful. But for the panel members you see sitting on stage right now, it's taken a huge amount of time, preparation, and energy to be here, and to put on a brave face and talk about raw and real things. And so these questions are tiring, draining. Like a demanding teenager, they suck out what little life we have left. Like the story Lucienne told of the small boy, in an increasingly fragile society, we must be mindful of what we lump on each other. Gone are the days of washing away present-day responsibility with statements like, "Oh, the next generation, they've got this." Gone are the days of asking scientists, artists, really anyone on the front lines of the crisis to give you hope. Truth is, that's not our role. Our children cannot fix a broken planet. Our frontline workers cannot fill this world with endless inspiration. These are not fair or reasonable requests of each other. The word hope, we hate it. It's a dirty word, an overused word, a word that can be so empty and meaningless. It's the word that gets used when you don't actually want to do anything. I hope they get better. I hope the scientists will find a cure. For us, it's the equivalent of a swear word, like saying fuck in front of your grandparents. We now ask you to step in our shoes for a minute. This is a chance for you to imagine yourselves in our position as scientists, as artists, as people on the front line of the environmental crisis. This video that I'm about to play was taken earlier this year on Lord Howe Island. It is just one of countless shearwaters that we necropsied. Almost all of them had ingested plastics. Almost all of them were underweight or sickly or both. When I dreamt of working with nature, this is not what I had pictured. This is far from it. But this is what I'm stuck with. So I ask you not to turn away from this. Don't close your eyes. Don't hide away from this reality. Don't turn away from that discomfort. Use it to make something happen. Use it as the fuel you need to make the necessary positive changes in your life. We are asking for a minute's silence.
That video that you saw there is something that's done very commonly through a drift lab. In fact, just today, Megan and I were showing a new student how to do this, and we were necropsying Tasmanian shearwaters, and every single one of those also had plastic. So this is an issue that is also happening here right now. The experiences and stories that we've shared with you tonight are deeply personal and were at times quite difficult to write. In a way, these have been our witness statements, our raw and honest letters to you. We want to put the spotlight on a very real issue that is rarely spoken about but is widely experienced. If what we have shared with you tonight has evoked a sense of discomfort, sadness, anger or frustration, we invite you to use that feeling in literally any way that you can to bring about something better. Use your voice, your right to vote, your actions, literally no matter how insignificant you think they are, just to bring about that positive change that we really desperately need. We have and will continue to share the news from the front lines of many issues that we collectively face today. But now we need you more than ever. The window of opportunity is narrowing, but it is still open. Our wild places, precious species and children all need you, but most importantly, we really need you. Sincerely, Lillian, Jennifer, Megan and Lucienne.
Ladies and gentlemen, please continue to show your appreciation for these courageous women on the front line on the panel here. And dare I say, some courageous people in the audience tonight too. Thank you very much. Now, sadly, in what may be some kind of hackneyed metaphor for the bigger picture of what we're talking about, we started late. So we're not able to have a Q&A session right now because the next session is bearing down on us. However, we do want to honour this presentation with a continuing conversation. So this group will be moving outside of the Central Gallery, and I think you're sitting down near Lucienne's artwork outside, so please feel free, and you're very welcome to sit down and have a chat with everyone out there. In the meantime, if everyone could now leave the Central Gallery so we can prepare it for the next session. Thank you very much for coming.